Happy Sunday morning, everybody. This is an extreme weather briefing live on Tropical Storm Sally that continues to intensify in the eastern Gulf of Mexico, just to the west of Florida. Overnight last night, and actually throughout its early life cycle, this tropical cyclone has been battling just a little bit of subtle northwesterly wind shear, and that has led to a tilt from the low-level cyclone up through the convection from the north to the south. That's as it was passing over far southern Florida, and now it's turned off to the northwest. Yesterday, it tracked right along the southwestern coast of Florida, but now it appears that it's beginning to get a bit more vertically oriented from the surface cyclone up to the convection. These tropical cyclones like to be vertically stacked, different than systems that you'd see in the mid-latitudes that thrive off of temperature gradients. These tropical cyclones in a barotropic environment, or one that is completely void of those temperature gradients in the tropics, like to be a vertically stacked heat engine. So basically you want the surface cyclone and the mid-level cyclone and all the convection up through the troposphere to be vertically oriented, and that's when you can get the maximum latent heat release. So when you have these updrafts inside convection, you get incredible condensation rates inside these storms, these tropical cyclones in the tropics, and every time that happens on the molecular level, you get a lot of latent heat release by those water molecules, and that is released throughout the column. That's how we call these hot towers. When you get those supercell-like storms that develop near the center of these tropical cyclones, that's because they're releasing a lot of latent heat, transporting heat from the ocean surface all the way through to the upper levels of the troposphere. These tropical cyclones are an incredible mechanism for transporting heat from the equator to the poles on planet Earth, and that's exactly what's happening here with Tropical Storm Sally. Hurricane reconnaissance aircraft shows that it continues to strengthen. Those surface pressures continue to fall down to 996 millibars near the center. That's extrapolated down to sea level pressure. And now the National Hurricane Center is forecasting Sally to strengthen into a Category 2 storm on approach to southeastern Louisiana. That's going to happen on late Monday, but the initial arrival of tropical storm force winds could happen across this region as early as Monday morning. And with this happening, there's going to be an absolute life-threatening storm surge in this region. This portion of the Gulf Coast is incredibly storm surge prone. In fact, a world record storm surge from Hurricane Katrina, I believe, happened here in the Waveland Bay St. Louis area. That's where we're initially targeting right now with this forecast track. That would put the strong side of this hurricane and all of that onshore flow across this very storm surge region from the mouth of the Mississippi River all the way through coastal Mississippi, coastal Alabama, even western Florida is going to have a storm surge with this storm. And there still is quite a bit of forecast track uncertainty. The GFS is showing a further west track closer to southwestern or south central Louisiana, whereas some of the hurricane models are showing an even earlier curvature to the north, but the official forecast track is right in the middle, the average between those two. And if this forecast happens, you're going to have life-threatening storm surge, likely double-digit storm surge beginning Monday p.m., continuing Monday night through Tuesday. And the worst-case scenario here could unfold with this system slowing down and intensifying on approach to the Gulf Coast. So different than a Hurricane Laura that was basically moving steadily at about 15 knots through and continuing to lift off to the north. This one's going to be more like a Harvey or a Florence, putting on the brakes on approach to the central Gulf Coast, and that's the worst case scenario because of the incredible rainfall rates you get with these tropical systems. Rainfall totals are going to be measured in feet with this system, and you can see just looking at the satellite imagery that a lot of the convection is loaded here on the east side of the system, and this is a very large system as well, and you're going to have onshore flow, devastating surge, flooding rainfall extending well to the east of where the center makes landfall. So you definitely don't want to just be focused on the exact track right now, because there's going to be life-threatening impacts all the way to the east, and I'm going to show you those experimental storm surge maps from the National Hurricane Center as well. And look at this loop. And what's concerning here is that we're now getting convection closer to the center of this. Most of the convection so far during the duration of Tropical Storm Sally has been shunted off to the south because of some storm relative shear that's out of the northwest. That's forecast to weaken as we go through the day today, and especially during the day tomorrow. And that's why there is the potential for even rapid intensification on approach to the central Gulf Coast, southeastern Louisiana, coastal Mississippi. There's a hurricane warning area you can see there in pink. That's the hurricane warning zone that is already in effect. And again, we expect the arrival of those tropical storm force winds as early Monday. And you can see some storms already developing here along coastal Florida, northwestern Florida, that do have waterspout potential. So you definitely want to be on the lookout for waterspouts throughout western Florida, all the way around the Big Bend, Florida Big Bend area. And I see that these storms are already developing with the heating of the day, as there is some sun on the outside of the cloud shield associated with Sally. So I do think that there is a decent chance of waterspouts. And you can see the cloud tops there with those storms starting to intensify in the very outer bands of Tropical Storm Sally. That's where I think that there is the greatest chance for waterspout potential with this storm. But this is the development of the inner core. And once we have a more organized inner core with Sally, that's when rapid intensification is going to begin to occur. And I think that that could begin to happen as early as this evening, overnight tonight. I do think that the bottom could drop out of Sally and certainly could intensify much more rapidly than is being shown. Zooming in on the high resolution satellite imagery here on the Radar Omega app. These are the past track of the center of Sally. This is a forecast track out ahead here in lime green, showing that west-northwest motion. And then upon approach to southeastern Louisiana Monday evening, it's going to put on the brakes, slow down, and there's nothing more dangerous than a slowing down tropical cyclone that is also intensifying. It's just going to batter the entire region over multiple tidal cycles. There's going to be deadly storm surge flooding, and you can really see some of these colder cloud tops starting to show up there. Those are some of those hot towers. That is a term that's so commonly used amongst meteorologists now. But those are little individual supercell storms that will develop near the core of that hurricane. And the enhanced updraft from the mesocyclones of those towers are shooting further up into the troposphere. And that's when you get these little overshooting tops that will happen there. And that's where you have maximum latent heat release happening. And beneath that column, you also get maximum pressure falls at the low levels, and this is definitely a textbook intensifying tropical cyclone. I do expect most of this convection to wrap all the way around the center, and then it'll develop a more organized inner core as those positive feedback mechanisms begin to take over. You get more convection, you get greater surface pressure falls, more convergence at the low levels. That creates runaway convection. You get more latent heat release, more pressure falls, and those positive feedback mechanisms are inherent in a rapidly intensifying storm. Right now, though, Sally just continues to organize with those surface pressures that are now down to 996 millibars. I'm going to show you the Hurricane Hunter aircraft data, the latest Hurricane Hunter data as well. Let's look now at the radar data that we have here at the Tampa area. If I can get rid of this annotation tools here. There we go. So let's look at some updated radar data, and then we can see how this system looks offshore. And again, as I mentioned, there is a bit of a tilt with this system from the low-level mesocyclone to aloft. And you can really begin to see these supercell towers. It looks like the center is right in this region based on radar. And there still is a bit of a tilt from the low-level cyclone up to this convective shield. But as we just saw on satellite, you can see this new convection that is beginning to wrap around the north side of the center. It's beginning to get a better developed inner core. You can even see some of these supercell storms that are apparent. Here, these we're on satellite that we're generating some of those overshooting tops. Those are very close to the center as well. And all of these thunderstorms are producing incredible latent heat release, contributing further to those surface pressure falls of the system as it continues to organize. But this you can see in real time here on radar. From Tampa Bay radar looking off to the west, you can certainly see where that center is. And this convection here now closer to the center and even on the north side of the center starting to wrap in toward Tropical Storm Sally. So it definitely is intensifying. There's also feeder bands that are evident continuing to feed in from the south. And I do think that overall, looking at this radar, the tornado threat will probably be a little bit lower further south here across west central Florida, and I think northwestern Florida up near the Big Bend area, where there's a little bit of subtle dry air at the mid-levels, some daytime heating, generating some low-level instability. That's where I do think that the threat for waterspouts is greatest. And let's look at some of those potential waterspout producing storms already up into northwestern Florida. We saw them on satellite with some of those colder cloud tops. So we're going to load the radar data and show where those are developing. So it's these bands of convection that can certainly have waterspout potential. That's why there are special marine warnings in effect for these. They can even have some transient supercell structures within. You could even see some of these little appendages that are embedded within this line. And these certainly do have waterspout potential as they're approaching Apalachicola from the east. This is an area that's notorious for waterspouts with this shape of the coastline. You get a lot of interacting sea breeze boundaries. You get a lot of convergent bands that form right along the coastline. And in this case, this is the very outer band of an intensifying tropical storm Sally that does have that waterspout potential heading in toward the Apalachicola area. So again, as I mentioned, what makes this storm system different than a Hurricane Laura is that it's putting on the brakes on approach to the central Gulf Coast, and that means there's going to be absolutely incredible rainfall totals. These are the rainfall totals as forecast by the high-resolution European model that has a forecast track that is fairly close to the official forecast National Hurricane Center track. Realizing, though, that the GFS members are further west, bringing the track a little bit closer to south central Louisiana, which would shift this heavy rain shield a little off to the west. And those brown colors there are in excess of 15 inches of rainfall through the duration of this storm. Worst case scenario could be over 2 feet of rainfall across southeastern Louisiana, southern, even up into central Mississippi. And this depression, after it makes landfall, is forecast to turn off to the northeast, passing through northern Alabama, northern Georgia, bringing with it a continued flash flood threat and even an inland tornado threat as well. But the rainfall is going to be a big deal with this system. The rainfall, the storm surge, slowing down a tropical cyclone is just an absolute worst case scenario for the coastal regions. When you get rainfall that's measured in feet, that rainfall flows down the rivers. There's a storm surge coming in from the Gulf of Mexico at the same time, and you get many different types of flooding out there. You get flash flooding, you get the river flooding, you also get the storm surge flooding, which could be in the double digits from the mouth of the Mississippi River through coastal Mississippi, depending on that exact track, but with a life-threatening storm surge extending hundreds of miles east of wherever that center comes ashore. But this is from the Pivotal Weather website, these forecast models. So definitely a dangerous scenario here for the central Gulf Coast, and unfortunately it's a scenario that the residents there are just all too familiar with. So now let's look at the forecast steering flow, but first I want to show you the tilt that was analyzed this morning. This is from the RAP analysis looking at the Gulf of Mexico, showing where that low pressure system was located, but you can see how the convection is located off to its southeast. And so clearly quite a tilted system this morning, but based on satellite and radar trends, it does appear to be getting much more vertically stacked as we're going through the morning and through the day today, as that wind shear is forecast to weaken. These are the storm relative anvil winds, and you can see those subtle northerlies that are in place near the center of Sally, and that's what's been sending that convection off to the south into the southeast half of this tropical cyclone so far. But forecast models are really showing that to weaken with time as we go through the day today, and especially tomorrow, with rapid intensification certainly possible as this approaches southeastern Louisiana. So the recon mission, this is the latest recon mission, and there is one that's in progress right now that is exploring the center of Sally as we're getting that convection closer to the center of the tropical cyclone. Runaway latent heat release is happening with that convection closer to the center. But earlier this morning, we did have a recon mission that showed extrapolated surface pressure down to 996 millibars. That shows that despite that tilt from the low levels up with that subtle northerly shear, we're still getting surface pressure falls. And so once that core becomes organized around the center of this cyclone, that's when rapid intensification is going to be possible. And I think that could happen as early as tonight. And here shows that pressure down to 996 millibars as measured by Hurricane Hunter aircraft. The heroes of this process as they're going into this storm over and over again, recording incredibly valuable data to show how this storm system is progressing. And here are the basic steering currents right now. And as I mentioned, there still is some model discrepancy. The GFS members are taking a little bit further west of a track. Some of the hurricane models are showing an earlier curve poleward, possibly even putting coastal Alabama, the Mobile Bay area in play for the worst storm surge of the system. But the official forecast track is right towards southeastern Louisiana, and that would put the very storm surge prone locations, Slidell, New Orleans area, especially Plaquemine Parish, down there in far southeastern part near the mouth of the Mississippi River, Venice, Louisiana, all the way through Waveland, Bay St. Louis, and the concave nature of the shoreline there and those rivers that are flowing into the Gulf of Mexico make it a particularly storm surge prone area. But we have an anticyclone here across the southeastern U.S. extending over the subtropical Atlantic. We also have a pretty potent shortwave with most of the flow located on the east side, so this shortwave is not amplifying with time, but it is going to shear over top this anticyclone, but also anchor it in place there, and that's going to cause a curve to the north on the western periphery of this anticyclone. But this trough, which is not amplifying, but actually shearing out and over the top of that ridge, is not going to effectively pick up this storm system, and that's why it's going to put on the brakes on approach there to southeastern Louisiana, and then gradually drift inland and do a slow turn to the northeast, eventually taking over northern Alabama, northern Georgia there, with a continued flash flood threat as we go through the middle to later portion of next week. But landfall looks like it's going to be Tuesday morning, early Tuesday morning across far southeastern Louisiana, and then eventually continuing to push inland by Tuesday afternoon near coastal Mississippi as well. But the impacts are going to begin early on Monday during the day tomorrow. There's going to be a storm surge flooding across multiple tidal cycles, with that big time storm surge coming in, of course, as the powerful right eye wall comes in. And as I mentioned, the National Hurricane Center official forecast now has Laura intensifying into a Category 2 storm on approach, and as it's slowing down, so you have an intensifying tropical cyclone that is also putting on the brakes, creating an incredibly dangerous worst-case scenario here for the central Gulf Coast. And with rapid intensification possible, it certainly could become a major hurricane on approach as well. Category 3, even a Category 4 storm can never be ruled out, especially as that wind shear is really weakening with this system as we go through the day today, and especially tomorrow. I think overnight tonight and through tomorrow, that's when that period of rapid intensification could happen. And here's the experimental storm surge product from the National Hurricane Center. And this shows the potential for double-digit storm surge, absolute life-threatening storm surge from the mouth of the Mississippi River through coastal Mississippi, and even a prolific, damaging storm surge extending hundreds of miles to the east of this system, all the way to western Florida. Could have a pretty substantial storm surge. And again, it could the forecast track could still change substantially as we go through the next 24 to 36 hours. But with the current official forecast track by the National Hurricane Center, definitely expecting a double-digit storm surge from the mouth of the Mississippi River all the way through the very storm surge prone area there of southwestern Mississippi. So this zone right here, given the concavity of the shoreline, those onshore winds just dominating this region across multiple tidal cycles, with the hurricane slowing down as well. Even a life-threatening storm surge anticipated in Lake Pontchartrain. And this Katrina-like track is the worst-case scenario because these southeasterly and easterly winds will pile up the water in Lake Pontchartrain. And so you almost get a double whammy with the surge there. The winds out ahead of the hurricane will pile those waters in Lake Pontchartrain, and then when the winds shift on the backside of the cyclone, that water that is piled up in the lake sloshes back out, flooding different areas often that weren't impacted by that initial surge. You can also see the very storm surge prone Mobile Bay there. We got Dauphin Island on the west side of it, Gulf Shores on the east side of that bay. Onshore winds will be absolutely piling up the water in Mobile Bay. And if this thing takes a little further east track and turns poleward off to the east, then that would also put Mobile and southern Alabama in the worst part of the surge. But right now, the worst part of the surge looks like it's going to set up southeastern Louisiana from the mouth of the Mississippi River through coastal Mississippi on the western side there. And as I mentioned, the earliest winds, tropical storm force winds, could arrive as early as tomorrow morning across this area. This is the line for 8 a.m. showing the arrival of those tropical storm force winds. In fact, even by Monday evening, all the way up into central Mississippi. This is a big storm with a big wind field. And one thing the Gulf of Mexico seems to be very good at doing is intensifying these tropical systems into major hurricanes, at least with recent years. You've got Hurricane Harvey, you have Hurricane Irma, you have Hurricane Laura, Hurricane Michael, and now Sally. It just seems like recently things continue to get worse. And now I'm going to show you some of the hurricane models. This is the forecast for intensity from the hurricane models. And this happens time and time again here in the Gulf of Mexico, where the models are showing more of a Category 1 storm, weaker a hurricane, and then it ramps up on approach to the Gulf of Mexico. And here are some of those hurricane models, courtesy of Levi Cohen's incredible website, tropicaltidbits.com. And most of the hurricane models are confining Sally to a Category 1 storm. But even if it comes in as a Category 1, slowing down like this with that onshore flow, you're still going to see a storm surge of 6 to 10 feet, life-threatening storm surge across the central Gulf Coast region. But one thing we've learned over these last 5 years or so is that these hurricanes in the Gulf of Mexico have a tendency to rapidly intensify into major hurricanes before making landfall. So you definitely want to anticipate a worse storm, potentially catastrophic storm out there. That could happen in the central Gulf of Mexico. Let me put on the satellite imagery again to break down this just a little bit further. Using the Radar Omega app and the awesome tracking tools that we have on this. Even 3D tracking tools so that we can analyze some of these in 3D. These are those waterspout producing bands here that we can see on high resolution satellite, some of these colder cloud tops. This one right here looks like it could be producing a waterspout on approach to the Apalachicola area. Looking off to the east, you likely see some stout cloud bases out there with this convective band that is moving from east to the west toward Apalachicola. So definitely keep an eye out for those potentially impactful waterspouts out there. But expanding out, you can see the core, the big-time core of this tropical cyclone that continues to intensify. I could easily see this becoming a hurricane overnight tonight and strengthening a bit more rapidly than forecast, but still the National Hurricane Center has this intensifying into a Category 2 over the marshlands of southeastern Louisiana. And there's the new track. We just got a new track that now keeps Hurricane Laura as a Category 1 on approach to the Gulf Coast, even a little bit further west of a track. So looks like that GFS ensemble could be winning out a bit with this further west track, putting Grand Isle, Louisiana, over greater impacts from this Category 1 storm as it approaches. So the National Hurricane Center has decreased the intensity just a bit as this storm approaches, and that's probably based on those hurricane intensity models. The wind shear continuing its proximity to land just a bit, but with this storm slowing down a little bit later over the land, that would also reduce its residence time over the very warm waters. But still, I think that this storm could become a major hurricane on approach. We've seen this happen so many times. And look at those hot towers developing right there. Definitely a lot of latent heat release that's happening as this convection now has organized in general closer to the center of this tropical cyclone as it moves off to the west-northwest. But these are the latest forecast track from the National Hurricane Center has pushed just a little bit, ever so slightly off to the west, but still brings this area to the east of the mouth of the Mississippi River in an area of a potentially life-threatening storm surge. Double-digit storm surge values are certainly possible there. But the GFS ensembles do have that further west track. The GFS did a very good job with Hurricane Laura as well. So that is the latest so far on Sally. That continues to intensify as a tropical storm and coming into a very storm surge prone area here in the central Gulf Coast. And one thing I want to show you here right at the end is the a fascinating thing that happened when Tropical Depression 19 was first organizing off the coast of southeastern Florida. It had a very, very small inner core that basically consisted of just one supercell storm. And there you can see that supercell storm, the mesocyclone that happened. Basically, we could call this a hot mesocyclone that was out there. But let me show you the radar loop of that in progress. And that created a lot of latent heat release, runaway latent heat release in the vicinity of that hot mesocyclone. Big time a lift as well. When you have a mesocyclone like this, the updraft strength is enhanced dramatically through vertical pressure gradient forces, and that enhances that lift. It enhances the latent heat release that much more, reduces those surface pressures, and in this case, with just a lone supercell storm at the center of TD19 approaching southeastern Florida, there was likely a water spout. Occasional water spouts in the vicinity of that mesocyclone. There you can see the velocity loop as it was approaching southeastern Florida, producing an occasional water spout. And the latent heat release from a water spout up to a mesocyclone is just unfathomable with a system like this. You likely had a spout that had incredible condensation right from that warm ocean surface all the way aloft to the overshooting top, releasing latent heat throughout its time. And this helped organize Tropical Depression 19 on its way to becoming Tropical Storm Sally on approach to southeastern Florida. And if this supercell storm came in as it did here into southeastern Florida, there likely would have been some wind damage caused by this, maybe some tornado-like damage right along the coast. But it did weaken on approach to far southern Florida, passed over the Florida Peninsula, and then emerged over southwestern Florida yesterday over those warm waters of the eastern Gulf. And now it's gradually organizing as that storm relative northerly shear is reducing as we're going through this Sunday morning. But the National Hurricane Center has adjusted down a little bit that intensity, but you don't want to get too focused on the exact intensity of this system. Remember Hurricane Ike that came in as a Category 1 storm down in Galveston, had an absolutely life-threatening storm surge across Galveston Island and the Bolivar Peninsula. This storm would be similar if it came in as a Category 1 storm, but there certainly is a chance, as is always the case with these systems in the Gulf of Mexico, for rapid intensification. My plan is to head into New Orleans area tonight. I'm renting a small sedan that might get swamped into the storm surge. Hopefully not. Meeting up with Mike Tyson, the HERV, as well to document Hurricane Sally coming into the central Gulf Coast. And we're definitely going to have more intimate coverage of the storm surge. The Surgeonator, or the Storm Surge Probe, is still under development. It's not quite going to be ready for this hurricane, but I do think that the next hurricane, it'll likely be ready, and it also factors in the salinity of the water. It uses the pressure, basically the weight of the water based on using pressure sensors, and can measure the height of the storm surge that's impacting the sensor. It'll also have a unit above the water that's measuring gravity waves and pressure falls inside these hurricanes. But just the latest loops here, you can see some hot towers that are developing. It's possible that the center of the storm could be a little bit further north than the forecast track. But when I woke up this morning, this is a strongly tilted system from the low levels to the convection off to its southeast due to some storm relative northerly shear. But as the storm bends back to the west, the storm relative northerly shear is going to reduce, and this inner core is going to become more organized and should contribute to further intensification all the way up until landfall. So thank you everybody for tuning into my weather reports. I'll be in the field starting tonight, and I'm going to do unrelenting weather briefings all the way up until landfall, field reports as well, live streaming out there in the field through the entire duration of this storm. And it looks like it's going to be more of a daytime landfall, so you'll likely be able to see some of those conditions evolving over time. But we're meeting up with the team tonight, and we'll be in full-blown chase mode through the night tonight, tomorrow, landfall, late Monday night, early Tuesday, even as late as Tuesday afternoon, depending on the rate that this storm system slows down. Very complicated forecast with those steering currents reducing on approach to the central Gulf Coast. But I certainly could see a further west track of the GFS verifying, potentially bringing this thing in to the south central coastline of Louisiana, an area that already has damage, quite a bit of damage from Hurricane Laura. So thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your Sunday, and I'll continue giving you live briefings as Tropical Storm Sally intensifies in the eastern Gulf of Mexico.